Well, we're in for a real treat today for our seminar speaker on travel this year. We have Elaine Lee here, who's a globetrotter and travel journalist. She has visited 56 countries and has made 2 solo trips around the world. She is the editor of Go Girl, the Black woman's book of travel and adventure. Her freelance writing has appeared in numerous magazines, and she has been featured on local and national radio and TV. Her website, You Go Girl, is one of the leading portals of Black travel information and resources. Let's please welcome Elaine Lee.
Thank you, Joe, for that wonderful introduction. Merci, gracias, de nada. And to all of you, I say wonderful, wonderful Wednesday morning. Bonjour. Hola. And in Thailand, they say sawadika. I bow to the God within you. I don't know. That's a good question. There's 56 countries, so probably a lot of different ways. But I welcome this awesome opportunity to talk about my favorite subject, which is travel. It's truly the music of my soul. I'd like to start by sharing with you why I love to travel. It's on the road that my inner voice speaks the loudest and my heart beats the strongest. It's on the road that I take extra pride in my frizzy hair and my full features and my lineage. It's on the road that I develop my sixth sense. And when the hairs on my arm go up and say, Lainey, don't go there, I listen. When I'm on the road, I'm a poet, I'm an ambassador. I'm a medicine woman, a genius, and sometimes even an angel. When I'm on the road, I am fearless. I'm unstoppable. And if necessary, will roll up my fists and fight back. When I'm on the road, I talk to my deceased parents and they speak back. When I'm on the road, I push the reset button on my life, recalibrate, stop, refuel, and begin again. It's on the road that I learn what freedom truly is. And that transforms me into a citizen of the world, where my compassion, my affection, and my humanness are raised to high, high levels, and I share unconditionally. When I am on the road, I arrive empty, and I leave full. That's a poem written by Sana Musama that I love, that truly captures my love for travel. And it says many reasons why I travel. But what stumps me when I'm on the road, as he's mentioned, I've been to 56 countries, 2 trips around the world. My other big why is, why don't I see more Black people on the road? Where are they? What's going on, you know? And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir by talking about this subject, but I just want to lay the groundwork for my speech and share a little bit about the history of African American travel. As most of you know, much of our time here in America has been fraught with complications and difficulties when it comes to travel. I mean, not only from Africa to America, where millions of us lost our lives in the transatlantic slave trade, but when we got into slavery, we couldn't travel without a pass from our master. And if we were caught without a pass or fleeing, we would be maimed or killed, or, and in very, unfortunately, many situations, even members of our community would be harmed, because it would be up to our community to keep each of us from fleeing. So travel has had a lot of disincentives for us for a long time. Then after slavery, from the 1860s to the 1960s, we had, as you know, Jim Crow, American-style apartheid, where travel was difficult because we never knew what hotel we could stay in, if there would be, even if it would be hotels, if there'd be restaurants, what about public facilities? I remember my very first time going to the South at age 9. I'm from Michigan originally. My mother was from Monroeville, Alabama. She wanted to visit her homeland, and off we went. And after we got over the Mason-Dixon line, there were the signs colored and white, and I was like, oh, Mom, they've got colored water, you know. I was like so excited. What's colored water look like, you know? I was so clueless. But making light of it. But no, you know, that was very, very difficult. And then also there were towns like that were sundown towns. Has anybody heard of a sundown town? Where blacks weren't allowed to be there after sundown. You had to know where those were. If you made a mistake, you know, you could be harmed or killed. So, if you wonder, again, these are reasons, again, why black people a lot of times still, I think it's some of that and cellular memory, you know, post-traumatic slave syndromes, post-traumatic apartheid syndrome. A lot of us were reluctant to travel, and for most part, even in my parents' generation, and still to some degree today, most African-American travel was utilitarian. You go in for work, go into a funeral, and then more recently for family reunions, but generally for a purpose, not recreational or adventure. But as we've seen over the last 20 years, they are changing, and folks are starting to let go of those fears and those patterns and trying new things. And as we've seen, more and more people are starting to get involved in, as we've heard earlier, cruising and casino travel and cultural travel. I just read the other day that the Essence Festival had over 500,000 people there last year. Unbelievable. Heritage travel, going back to Africa, that kind of thing is changing. And as more and more African Americans are becoming executives and entertainers and entrepreneurs, are traveling abroad, as well as even in the military, 26% of the military is African American. So folks are traveling and are learning, wow, the planet is really a safe place. You know, in the United States, things have not necessarily always been safe, and still to this day are problematic. But a lot of places are safe. I mean, so yeah, I just had a flashback about safe travel. I mean, you know, when back in the 50s, like I said, 1860s and 1960s, you know, it was unsafe travel. And it, you know, you say, wow, traveling while black was difficult then, you know, and it's still difficult to this day, you know, as we saw on TV over the weekend. But folks are still going to get out there, and now we're learning that not only is it safe most places in the world, we're often treated very well, I mean, and welcomed, and it's very, very comfortable for us. And I think one of the things I found interesting too is the pervasiveness of African culture, or the appreciation of African American culture throughout the world, which made it very safe for me and welcoming. And one of the things is, one of my little hobbies when I'm out on the road is to try to find African Americans that live in different countries around the world. And I think the most remote area I found was an interesting and welcoming black community in Wellington, New Zealand. We're everywhere. It's just unbelievable. And despite all of our wandering around the planet, as we know, most black people still prefer to travel in groups. And that's part of what brings you here today. We love our family reunions. We love our conventions. Love our festival travel. And because they're really, I think part of it is safety in numbers. I still think that we still feel that, as well as just enjoying each other's company. And being minorities in the country, it's kind of nice to be in a majority world for a change. I think that really helps a lot. When I grew up in Michigan, we used to go to Idlewild every summer. Anybody heard of Idlewild? Yes. So, you know, for a few months a year, there we were in a black world, and it just was really edifying, a wonderful thing for us to experience. When we're second-class citizens, the rest of the time of the year, you get to be first-class citizens for at least a couple months. So that fear of travel alone is real and hard. And I remember the very first time I was taking my first trip around the world. And the week before I was supposed to leave, I was truly terrified. I was like, oh my God, what is it gonna be like? What if something happens to me? What happens if I can lose my money? I mean, I was just really freaking out. And one of my girlfriends had a come to Jesus meeting with me, and it's like, Elaine, she says, money is a replenishable resource. Time is not. You set aside this time, you get out there and see the world, I got your back, don't worry. So it's like, okay, here I go. And I took off on my 6-month journey, and little did I know once I got out there, the world, and for the most part, unless you're at a country at war, it's pretty safe. And as long as you learn, how to navigate, how to be smart, and learn the rules of the road, it was actually a wonderful adventure for me. And I had a grand and glorious time. And again, was so frustrated that I saw so few black people. I said, this is something that we should see. We should learn what it feels like to not live with racism for a while, and just to be free, and to not be in a pigmentocracy where we're just judged by our hearts and who we are. And it's just it was a wonderful feeling. And I thought, I want to encourage more African Americans to travel. I want to demystify international travel. So that's when I came up with the bright idea of doing my travel book, Go Girl, the Black Woman's Book of Travel and Adventure. And then from there, as he mentioned, started doing freelance travel writing, and then radio and TV. But when my book came out in '97, I'm proud to say that it was the first in the modern era that I know of. But since then, another 25 black travel books have come out. So, you can see things are changing. Black people want to learn about travel, want to talk about it, want to share. And I actually have a list of black travel, at least a sampling of a list of black travel books. And Teresa, where is the list if people want to get that? Okay. Okay, so on your way out, if you're interested in seeing the list that I put together, you can pick that up, a list of black travel books, websites, magazines, and as well as information about my website. But back in '97, when I started, there were no black travel magazines, and now there's 3 of them: Pathfinders, Black Meetings in Tourism, and I think, is it another one? Odyssey Couleur. And so things are changing. When I started, there were 2 major black travel websites. Now there's probably hundreds, but at least 40 major ones. And now you've got this whole other layer of social media with the Facebook and Twitter. Has anybody heard of No Madness Tribe? The No Madness Tribe on Facebook, a phenomenal organization of people there. 9,000 members of this travel group, all young black people, and their trips are selling out in 15 minutes. And they, yes, it is on there. And I was reading in one of their blurbs that just the first 2 months of this year, their members booked 400 flights to the Middle East, Asia, and Africa alone. It's truly remarkable. Now, when I was going to Peru last year, I was, again, this issue of, oh my goodness, what do I do when I get there? Do black people go to Peru? I know there's black people in Peru. How do I find them? All those questions. I went on No Madness, put my information. I'm going to Peru. Does anybody have any suggestion? The next day, I got an email or a message from a couple, an African-American couple who happened to be traveling Peru at that time, and told me, well, you need to go here. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I had a grand and glorious time there, and I actually had a chance to visit the El Carmen neighborhood, which is where the Afro-Peruvians live. So that was exciting, and an example of how, the new media is making a difference. Does anyone else have any social media sites that you care to mention that you found very useful in your work? Yeah. Black Paris. Black Paris. That's a Facebook page or a Twitter? It's a website. Okay. Thank you. Soul of America. Yeah, that's a great website too. I have that on the list. Very helpful. Mm-hmm. Any others? All right. Well, as an adventure traveler, some of the changes that I've seen in my work is that, for example, with the National Brotherhood of Black Skiers, They had a membership in 1975 of 350 members, 12 clubs, and now they have 83 clubs and 3,000 members. And their convention is the largest ski convention in the United States, not black convention in the United States, the largest ski convention in the United States. And now they've begun to travel internationally. They've been to St. Moritz, France. They've been to Innsbruck, Austria, Mount Fiji, Japan. So these are groups that are traveling internationally that didn't used to travel. So this is a change that I think is interesting. The National Association of Black Scuba Divers, which in 91 only had 138 members and 5 clubs, now has 56 clubs and 2,000 members. And they always have their conventions abroad, most recently in Curacao, rather. They've also dived in, or dove, how do you say that, in Egypt, in Australia, and Tahiti. And lastly, I'll mention the National Black Boaters Group, which in 1997 had 1 boat and 8 sailors, and now has 24 boats and 174 sailors. So these are just interesting, different ways that African Americans are getting out there, exploring the planet in groups. And you also see that with other groups like the Black Surfers, Black Cyclists, Black Fishermen. These are all associations that travel internationally. And then even locally, the Black RV, Recreational Vehicle Association. So as we see, as I mentioned, times there are changing, and even though the growing sophistication of black travelers and our economic power is something to be reckoned with, we still have that concern of, are we going to be safe? Are we going to be welcome? Are we going to be comfortable? But that fear and those concerns are shrinking as our courage emerges and we're taking the world by storm. One of the trips I have planned for myself is that I would like to visit the Cameroons in Africa. I've been to Africa 5 times, but I want to visit the Cameroons because I recently had my DNA done and got my cellular information, and it turns out that I'm a descendant of the Bamileke tribe of Cameroons. So that's something I want to check out. Well, and as many of you know, it is customary in many African countries, speaking of Africa, to pay tribute to the ancestors during public events. And in the spirit of that tradition, I just want to give thanks and praise to early African American travelers for showing us by example that neither chains nor indoctrination can successfully harness the human spirit. I salute their vision, their adventuresome spirit, their ability to overcome the fear of the unknown, and their success against the odds. And with that, I am going to shift into a short slideshow and share some of my travel heroes with you. And I've named my slideshow From the Slave Ship to the Spaceship in praise of the African American traveler. And the first one I'd like to mention is Phyllis Wheatley. I bet most of you have heard of her. She sailed to England in 1773, and she wrote a poem called Farewell to America in that year. Paul Cuffe led a group of 38 African Americans in the repatriation to Sierra Leone in 1815. Martin Delaney in 1847 led a group of African Americans to Nigeria to find a possible place for a new homeland for themselves. And then Nancy Prince actually wrote this book in 1850, A Black Woman's Odyssey. Isn't that amazing? I was so surprised when I learned that. Had anybody heard of her before, Nancy Prince? Yeah. She sailed to Russia and the Caribbean. And as I said, I think this was like the earliest African American travel book that I was able to find. Next, Mary Seacole. She's the author of The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands. That's the name of the book. She published that in 1857, and she lived in Panama, in Russia, in London, and traveled extensively in the Caribbean. And I know most of you are familiar with her, Harriet Tubman, conductor of the Underground Railroad, in 1850s and 60s made 19 dangerous trips below the Mason-Dixon line to deliver African Americans to freedom. 19 trips, that's phenomenal. So has anyone heard of, I'm sure, the card game called Bid Whist? and what about the feature in Bid Whist called Rise and Fly? Okay. Does anybody know where the word, that phrase, rise and fly, comes from? So in early slave times, many slaves felt that if you could get your mind just right, do your juju just right, you could rise and fly back to Africa. And so that, that gave them hope, that there was possibly a way to get back. And I think it's so interesting that word, that phrase, rise and fly, has made it into our nomenclature of a common card game today, and a lot of us don't even know. I didn't know until I did the research. So I'm hoping if with my second book, that's what I want it to be the subtitle, Rise and Fly. And this is a Stagecoach Mary, the first. I think that's kind of funny. People. So no nonsense kind of gal, as you can see. Pistol toting mama. And she was the first African American employed as a stagecoach carrier in the United States back in 1895. And she traveled extensively in northern America, in primarily Minnesota and Montana areas. And then many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Matthew Henson, who's was actually from Maryland, and is said to be, well, he's certainly the first black person to reach the North Pole, and some say the first person to reach the North Pole. And then Charles Young, someone I learned about recently, who is the first African American National Park Superintendent in 1906 to 1903. Oh, imagine that. And under his guidance, he brought a group of more than 400 Buffalo soldiers to patrol Yosemite National Parks, Yosemite, Yellowstone, and Sequoia. And they were the country's first national park rangers. And in 2003, Barack Obama designated his home as a national monument. And here's my personal hero and my guardian angel, Bessie Coleman, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. Yes, she's the first licensed African-American pilot. And as you know, she received her license to fly in France in 1921. After being turned down by schools in America, she got a job as a manicurist, raised the money to move to France, taught herself French, moved to France, learned how to fly, and came back to the United States and worked. But that's, what determination, And now I bet many of you have heard of the Green Book. Has some of you have not heard of the Green Book? Okay. So the Green Book was published by Victor Green, an African-American postal worker out of Harlem. And he published this yearly from 1936 to 1964. And it was set up to help black drivers, the motor safety guys should appreciate this, to help them navigate the United States safely. Because, as I mentioned before, because of segregation, people didn't necessarily know where to stay. But he would list, hotels, restaurants, bathrooms, the sundown towns as well, so that blacks could safely travel around America. And his publications were averaging about 15,000 a year. And initially they were free, and later they were 10 cents a piece. He was actually got a sponsor, Standard Oil sponsored this book. And it was a very successful endeavor, and helped thousands and thousands of African Americans navigate the country. And this is a picture of Victor Green. And there's someone new I learned about recently, Janet Bragg, a little bit different from Bessie Coleman. She was actually the first African-American woman to get her pilot's license here in the United States, which she did in 1942. And Guy Bluford, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, who was our first African-American astronaut. So not only he's traveled out of the world, not around the world, but out of the world 4 times. And as you can see, travel is a time-honored tradition among African Americans, and it's marked our journey from Africa to America, from slavery to freedom, from the slave ship to the spaceship. And now I'm just going to mention a few contemporary heroes, and this is not intended to be comprehensive. These are just a few people that I've stumbled across that I thought were interesting and I thought I'd share with you today. Sophia Danenberg was the first African-American woman to scale Mount Everest, and she did that in 2006. Many of you have heard of Barbara Hillary. She's the first black woman to reach the North Pole. And she also reached the South Pole in 2011, which she did at age 75. And she did that as a lung cancer survivor. So that should inspire us to keep going. And I thought this was somewhat interesting. Keen Shoemakers launched a national campaign, the very first that I was able to find in the country, where they featured an African-American family outdoors hiking. And it's like, now you see it a little bit more often, but before 2012, this scene was very rare. So I was proud and happy to see that Keene acknowledges that black people like to go outside and do things, and we buy shoes too. This next group, let's see where they're coming. Okay, Expedition Denali team. This is the first group of African-American climbers to attempt the summit, climb the summit on the highest peak in America, which is Denali, or Mount McKinley in Alaska. And they did that just last year, I think. That was 2013. And Rue Mapp, she's the founder of an organization called Outdoor Afro, and they have 43 chapters around the country and encouraging African Americans to get out in nature and explore nature. And she won the 2013 Outdoor Industry Inspiration Award, and just this year won the National Wildlife Federation Award for her work. One of the things that her group has done is they've created an African American National Park Day, which is June 22nd. And this will be the second year of them celebrating, and they had 13 events around the country last year and the year before, celebrating African American presence in national parks, as well as acknowledging that history that I mentioned earlier about Charles Young and the Buffalo Soldiers. And this is Tracey FINLEY, and she was named the National Geographic Traveler of the Year in 2013 and 14 for a project she started called the Passport Party Project, where she got funding to get passports and first-time travel experiences for 100 underserved girls across America, age 11 to 15, to try to teach them the importance of international travel. And also they created a teen ambassador program. So tell me somebody I left out. Who did I leave out? That's really important. One of our current travel heroes. Anybody want to share? There's also this group called Grannies on Safari. Has anybody seen that? They're the first, their longest running TV series hosted by an African American person. They've won an Emmy for their PBS specials called Grannies on Safari. Anybody else want to share a travel hero? Oh, come on. There's got to be. You got to. No? All right. Well, I am on the mission to be a hero in my own life, a travel hero in my own right. I'm trying. And one of my philosophies is that once a year, I try to go someplace I never have been. And this is a picture of me on top of FRANZ Glacier in New Zealand. That was, without a doubt, the most physically challenging thing I ever did. But I encourage all of you, whatever it is that you love to do, to figure out a way to make it a central part of your life. And as I said, travel is the music of my soul, and it makes me so happy to be alive. And I think, what better gift do I give my Creator than to be grateful for my life and to honor my ancestors with the deep gratitude for the gift of my life and my limbs and my ability to see and hear. And I think of that because, again, so often our ancestors wanted to travel and they couldn't travel. So when I go on my trips, I name them, I give them a name, and I offer my trips to my ancestors. And that might be part of the reason they're so filled with magic and so wonderful, is that I think they're channeling the blessing to me. And I also just give deep gratitude to the civil rights activists and abolitionists who worked so hard to make travel a right for us. It has not always been that, but people sacrificed and died to give me the right to travel, to give you the right to travel, and we owe them that homage. So I lift their names up in praise and happy that I could share some of that with you today. And I understand myself to be, the dream and the hope of the slave. And I'd like to close with a short excerpt of a poem by Maya Angelou, one of our newest ancestors, on that subject. She says, "Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear I rise. Bringing the gifts the ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise, and I fly." Thank you.